So guide took us on a hike to a 900-year-old almond tree.
Wow.
It was slogging and going uphill. There was mud, and we made it to this tree. It's almost indescribable. And I've seen redwood trees, which are pretty indescribable in their own right because they're so humbling. It's unless you're there, it's hard to imagine that feeling.
Welcome to the Enchanted Earth Podcast, where you will hear stories of nature with the power to transform our lives. These sacred stories are begging to be shared now. So listen in as my guest today shares one of their own. Well, hello, everybody. Today I have with us Eric Young, and let me tell you a little bit about Eric. Eric has been in the field of nature education for over 35 years. He has a master's in outdoor teacher education, 3 summers in the NWF Wildlife Camp, and 23 years as program director at a nature center. He has freelanced as a storyteller, author, and environmental educator. Welcome, Eric.
Good morning, Maureen.
We go way back. So I was realizing that probably when I met you, you were only a few years into Sweetbriar. For those of you who know me, I volunteer at Sweetbriar Nature Center for exactly 19 years to this month.
Wow.
And Eric interviewed me when I raised my hand to volunteer, and he designated that probably the best place for me was to answer the phones because I had no animal education kind of experience, but it was just a wonderful and continues to be a very fulfilling experience for me.
Well, it's a good thing you came in that day.
Yeah, so 19 years later, yeah, Sweetbriar is very dear to both of our hearts, and they're
How's
Smitty.
it ever been? Yep.
I love it. I love it. Okay, so we know each other very well, but I am always somewhat surprised by people's experiences, and you shared a little bit about the fact that you got into actually working with nature a little bit later. Can you tell me a little bit about your childhood related to nature?
I think the quickest answer to that, and I remember writing my foreword to my rainforest book about my dad and his inspiration. We didn't always get along, but we had that in common. He's the one who introduced me to the natural world through hikes, I can remember 6th grade was probably the biggest catalyst of all. We went to Yosemite and Grand Canyon, and that was it. As soon as I saw the wondrous things in those places, it just inspired me to want to do something with nature. And I went on to want to be a zoologist because of, you'll love this, sitting Sunday night at, I think it was 7 p.m. or 7:30 every evening on Sunday with my dad, watching Wild Kingdom with Jim Fowler and Marlon Perkins, and falling in love with, it's hard to put it into words, but maybe one word, the diversity of life in the world. And that came before those trips. Those trips, though, cemented my need to do something in the area of biology, zoology. But college kind of turned me off to zoology and biology because it was all research-based and I wanted to be outside. And so I was looking for direction. So that was the start of everything. We can go to the next part of it.
Yeah. So I just want to ask, when you went to Yosemite and Grand Canyon, is there a particular experience that pops out to you that was just like, wow?
I would say it was the whole thing, minus the hotels and everything. It was the whole thing of being in places that were so amazing. I hadn't yet tuned into the smaller things in nature. It was about the bigger things. And when I went there, that's about as big as you get, the Grand Canyon and the valley in Yosemite. But if I can remember one thing, the waterfall was not running. The huge Yosemite Falls did not have a drop of water in it when we got there. And I'm feeling disappointed inside, not knowing quite why, just the fact that I was missing the waterfall. And then somewhere, oh, I don't know, day 3 we were there, it started coming down slowly until the moment we left. It was maybe half of what it normally is, but that was enough to see the grandeur of that, I forget, 1,200-foot waterfall.
Wow. Was it climate driven that it stopped?
Yes, there was
Else?
it was over winter. We got there really early in the summer. It might have been delayed more than usual. Maybe they had a bigger drought than usual, but they were waiting for the snow melt. And I guess that we were there just about the time when the Sierras were starting to melt. And you know how the elevation of the Sierras are really high. So it takes a long time for that snow, the temperature to get where that snow can start melting. So we got the benefit of being there at the perfect time when it started running. And that was the moment I remember more than anything.
Wow. Stepping into view of that grand waterfall for the first time.
Yes, and this was pre long hiking days. You know, I was just a novice back then. So, and I'm sure my dad and mom really didn't want to hike to the top of Yosemite Falls. That was later. but, but it was quite an experience going from nothing to seeing that and hearing that amazing waterfall come down.
Wow, that is
Yes.
really, when you think about it, just an amazing experience to see it without the water and then with the water. As you said, not it's just the timing was perfect to be able to do that. Uh, wow.
And being only 12, it was more of a sensory experience than anything else. You know, just the hearing and the smell. Well, smell wasn't as big as the hearing and the sight of it. I think now that I'm a waterfall chaser in my retirement, I can look back and say that was the very first waterfall that I really got to see.
Oh, wow, yes. So, yes, I mean, on Facebook, you're always posting waterfalls. So that is just so beautiful. That's the start.
Yeah, and it's kind of hard to use the word waterfall chaser because waterfalls don't run away from you, you know. But you're trying to get to as many as you can. And I was reading in your book that it's the journey, not the destination, that's important, that's more important. And I'm thinking to myself, the journey is awesome, but it's always great to have a destination at the end because it gives you the motivation to do the journey. So, so those waterfalls are my motivation to do the journey.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Beautiful. So you go to college, you're getting a little reluctant about going after those sciences. So what did you land on and how did you do that?
So this is I was almost totally turned off by the, college experience because it wasn't in my head what I imagined it would be. I imagined that I would be like Marlon Perkins and Jim Fowler running out and just going out and seeing wildlife. Everything would happen spontaneously, not hours and hours and hours of research and preparation. So I'm thinking to myself, that's not what I want. I want to be outside. I have to find a career that gets me outside doing something with nature. And at that point, I really didn't know what when I got out of my undergrad with a bio degree
Mm.
uh, from SUNY Albany. And it was so sterile and dry. It just didn't turn me on at all to nature. The only thing I remember turning me on to nature was the plant taxonomy course where the older professor took us out to collect plants and make plant presses. That's the only exciting thing I can ever remember doing in undergrad that was nature related. It
It,
was all classroom and dull.
it isn't that just amazing? I mean, I hope it's changed now, but yeah, we're talking about like the 80s, right? 70s, 80s. It was classroom teaching about nature.
Right. I wish that I had known about places like Paul Smith College and ESF and places like that that were more like that, but I had no clue back then.
Right.
I went to Albany because my friend of mine went to Albany and said, "Oh, that's a good reason to go to college." Um, so I got a pretty sterile education, but in between that, when I graduated, in between moving on to upper education into grad school, I didn't know what to do with my degree. So I was pretty much just not doing much after college, just searching for the right thing to do. And somehow, some way, my mother, it's always my mother and dad, always one of them doing something. My mom found a job, part-time job at Nassau BOCES, teaching nature to school students, to students, mostly fifth and sixth graders. So that's where I ended up. This field is so I don't want to put down the field, but this field is so wide open to doing what you want to do. There's not a lot of presence of people watching you and telling you what to do, that I got to kind of play with kids in nature and do what I thought was the right thing to do without much training. But that short time with BOCES drove me to look for something else.
Oh,
Um, and I got great, a lot of us get great reviews because teachers are so happy to have the kids outdoors. So I was the only one getting good evaluations, but it obviously builds your ego to get positive feedback.
yeah. Yeah.
So I'm looking in a library because, there's no digital world in, what was it, 1985? So I looked through an internship book and I'm thumbing through it and I'm finding a couple really cool things. This field of outdoor education, it's really out there somewhere. Not like it is today, but there's stuff out there. So I applied to a couple places. I could have gone to the Catskills and worked up there at a place called the Shokin, which is still around, I believe.
Yeah.
Um, but this thing comes in from the National Wildlife Federation, the Ranger Rick Wildlife Camp. Now, who wouldn't get excited about seeing the Ranger Rick Wildlife Camp? In of all places, the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, which now has come full circle. Um, so I
Well, okay, because you live there
Yes, I live
now.
there now. Well, my windows aren't covered with snow anymore. If you look out my windows, there's nothing but trees. So I'm in the middle of the mountains now, and all because I worked at wildlife camp.
Wow. I did not know that.
So I got this internship. I was interviewed over the phone by a woman named Susan Johnson, who I'm still in contact with through Facebook mostly. But anyway, she hired me as an alternate. So I'm thinking I'm not going anywhere this summer. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know when the phone call came in. It's so long ago, but I got a call saying someone backed out. Would you like to join us down in North Carolina for the wildlife camp? Changed my life. Went down there as someone who was scared to death of being watched by people, by adults and judged. But again, they gave us so much freedom, but they also made us write lesson plans.
Oh.
Prepare for our what called quests during the summer, the nature part of the experience down there. So I taught rivers and lakes and streams my first year there. I can remember being so scared when Susan watched us, the director, for the first time, that I hardly spoke. But and she sat down with me and told me that and went over it. And by the next time when I was watched, it was a lot easier. But that experience in the Blue Ridge Mountains, working with kids in that kind of atmosphere and that kind of environment in the mountains with creeks and all kinds of forests to go play in with them was life altering. So that's when I decided that's where I'm going to make my career, was in environmental education.
All right. So, do you have a story to share in that camp?
Yeah, things like that, these connections to wildlife and to nature started coming later. This was like my classroom is a perfect way to put it. This is my classroom for being introduced on how to use the natural world to teach, on how to immerse yourself in nature. So it was, again, it was more sensory and emotional back then till it became more of a, um, not thinking of the word right now, but it became more of a knowledge-based thing. Um, Although I was teaching and learning also, but it was, if you wanna use a word for the teaching then, it was joy, you know? It was the joy of being outside and finding what you wanted to do in life. And I'm thinking, "There's no way I could make a career of this. It's just there's not a lot out there. It doesn't pay well. How am I gonna make a career of this?" So, during my 2nd summer there in '86, it made me go back, um, is when I got the, drive to wanna get my graduate degree somewhere in the field of, environmental outdoor nature education. They all have their own meaning, which philosophy may take too long to go into in a podcast, but each one of those has their own meaning and they get overlapped all the time.
Yeah.
Um, which, for better or worse, they get overlapped all the time. I have very specific educational philosophy about in teaching environmental education. So anyway, so that was that. Grad school was my next stepping stone. And somehow, some way, I found a degree in outdoor teacher education at Northern Illinois University. I can't begin to tell you what that experience was like, being with 11 people of like minds through a whole year. It was only a year degree. We were teaching assistants. So, our main function was to teach the school groups that came in, and I guess the outdoor teacher education component, which I never really connected completely why we were called outdoor teacher educators, was that we were supposed to meet with the teachers and kind of be their liaison. That's what we became. I always thought the degree was we were teaching teachers how to use the outdoors, but it became more of liaison with teachers. We were teaching the kids in the outdoors. We weren't teaching the teachers, although they were with the kids, so I guess there's some of that.
Yeah.
But I never felt it met exactly what it said it would meet.
Yeah.
But I had an awesome time, and most of it came from the freedom of doing what I wanted to do with the degree and being with 11 of the most amazing people you could imagine.
Oh.
That's so
So I would love for you to share a story with us, something that
well,
was deeply meaningful to you.
alright, I can tell you a story that happened during my graduate degree. Now, I was beginning to think I was in the coldest place in the world in Illinois in the summer, but I'm beginning to think Brevard might be might be equally it lately, but it really got cold. It's, the Midwest gets really cold, and I was in Northern Illinois, not Southern Illinois, so it was pretty cold there, and there was this one morning that it was 19 degrees out. Bitter cold. You walk out and you're in a refrigerator. If you're lucky, it's more of a freezer than a refrigerator. But of my craziness, I decided I was gonna go for a walk this morning, and I went with a mission, Maureen. I went with a reason to go out. I wanted to see a leaf fall from a tree from the moment it left its attachment to the moment it hit the ground. That was my mission. Now I said it was so cold. This was only November. I think it was before Thanksgiving, and it was that cold in Illinois. And I did not dress appropriately. I had warm socks, but I had sneakers on. So, um, everything else was pretty good, the coat, the hat, but the feet were not covered right. And there's like 3 inches of ice capped snow on the ground. So I started my journey, and my journey was gonna take me down a hill in what was called Loudon State Park. That's where the outdoor teacher education degree took place. And I wanted to go down to the creek, head that way, because that was off the beaten track more than some of the other trails. So I headed downhill, and I could already tell my feet were getting cold already. It was that cold. My face was getting, but I didn't stop my journey, even though I felt like maybe I should. It's really cold. cold, bone-chilling cold out. But I made my way down, and as I got to the bottom of the steps that led to the trails, there were hoof prints on the ground. It's amazing how you switch gears right away. For now is forget the leaf. There's a deer or more roaming around in the woods with nothing on the trees, so they should be easy to see and find if they're around. So I started following the hoof prints. Gets really difficult when there's like 5 sets of hoof prints or more on the ground, so I'm going all over the place. Finally, that's it. I'm not gonna find this deer. There's just way too many hoof prints. So I remembered my mission. I'm gonna catch that leaf falling from the moment it leaves the tree. It was perfect. It was November. The last leaves are on the trees. The wind was blowing, not heavy, but enough to knock a leaf off a tree. And I'm still really cold, my feet especially, but I see a tree that I can sit down against. But before I do, I kind of look around, and there is a tree, and there is a leaf dangling by its petiole, just ready to fall, its stem ready to fall off the tree. And I sit down and I watch this leaf. It's dancing, it's jiggling, it's doing all kinds of stuff, but it won't fall off the stem. And I'm just sitting there with freezing. However, you start to forget that you're freezing when your mind is concentrating on something. It's then that I was concentrating on the leaf that I looked beyond it, and there was a deer just standing about 50 yards from where I was sitting, looking at me, wondering, who is this? Or what is this thing just sitting there against the tree? And then I'm just staring back. I'm just from reading most of your book at this point, I get the feeling you've had the same sensation that you have to get closer to this somehow, get closer to this beautiful, dark-eyed animal that's staring right at you. And I decided I was going to get up and try to get a little closer. I knew one crunch of this ice-covered snow was going to scare that deer away. So I'm getting up really slowly, barely feeling my toes at this point, and I start to get up, crunch. You know how their head just bolts up? My guess is he was feeding a little bit there, but I got to 1 foot, and then he's just staring. I can't move. He's gonna bolt. So I'm just sitting there watching him, and he goes back to just pawing at the ground and looking for something to eat, and I do the other foot. Crunch. This time, there's not just a bolt up, he just takes off and goes over this little hillock. You can see the white tail go over and I go, "Shh." But it was worth every second just to spend whatever time that was. You lose time at that point. I don't know if it was 2 minutes or 10 minutes. It was probably a lot less than I thought because otherwise I would have been frozen completely. Um, but after he gone and after I got over that wonderful sensation of seeing that deer, I go, "Yeah, I'm supposed to watch that leaf fall off the tree." So I look over to the tree, the leaf is gone. I missed my opportunity. I was too cold to see the leaf fall from the moment it left the stem to the moment it touched the ground, and then I just went I was just too cold to hang out, and I just went back, and the truth, I've never seen a leaf fall from the moment it left the stem to the moment it hit the ground.
You know, our encounters with wildlife, oh, there's some wildlife right there. It can be so profound when we are in a present conscious moment.
I'm shaking right now. I don't know if it's remembering the cold or remembering the story.
Wow.
Well, it does. It has a, visceral effect on your body.
There there's something about gazing into the eyes of each other. There's that it's like an exchange of energy. It's not tangible, it's not visible, but there's something going on when we gaze into the eyes of another. That's why it's like wildlife is different than, say, connecting to a crystal or a rock or even a tree. It there's eyes to the soul of that animal that we identify with in some way.
and that sees us as a possible predator. It's kind of an interesting thing that it sees us as a possible danger or predator. Um, that if I move too much, it's gone. You know?
Yeah.
So you sometimes wonder, what are they thinking at that moment in time?
Yeah. I do feel, I think, some of us do feel that there is this level of consciousness of, like, the world soul within us and within all of animals, so that there is a deeper, more profound connection than, more of the survival level of predator, prey, and safety and, protection, and there's that, but then there's something deeper that that encounter is resonating with you at a deeper level. It's transforming you in some way.
My idol is John Muir, and he did that kind of stuff all the time. Tried to get connected with not just the living, but the non-living. He did the craziest things, and if you want to read about someone who got to the edge of nature, he's my role model. But he wrote that quick quote. I hope I don't. I'm probably paraphrasing. Touch a single thing in nature and find it hitched to the rest of the world. it's
Yes.
it's for a few words, it says an awful lot.
So can you describe how you felt when you saw that deer and you
Well, I can only know that the feeling now that I had was probably fairly similar to the and my body was just shaking telling the story. So, I know that I don't know if I felt like I was one with the deer, but I certainly felt like I was connected in some way that he saw me or she saw me as another living thing that could become part of its life, or death, which is pretty intense. You know? I guess the feeling is that a kind of an intense feeling of what nature is all about, and that we are so removed that we don't get those feelings very often. That we were once part of this whole thing.
that is yes, that is so true. We we at one time had these encounters and these feelings were just part of our existence. It was just part of our day. We felt, I would imagine, um, thousands, millions of years ago, we felt this kinship and this camaraderie as many indigenous cult or some indigenous cultures still do. They carry that tradition. And I feel so strongly that we're we're bringing that forward to now. It's important to remember this now for where we are with the planet.
I've been in nature a lot. I know there's people been a lot more than I have, and there's people been a lot less than I have. But I lived during the age where you're always out playing with your friends. Even if you weren't in nature, you were outside somewhere playing. Even with all my experience now spending time in nature, I haven't had a lot of those moments where you encounter wildlife, or should I say more exotic wildlife. You're used to seeing squirrels in your backyard. You're used to seeing lots of birds, but I haven't had all of those moments. And I guess I chalk that off to two things. I don't spend a lot of time, like you mentioned in your book, sitting and just enjoying what I'm hiking a lot, moving a lot.
Mm,
And the other part of it is most wildlife doesn't want to be around you. They go off doing their own thing, and they're in huge territories. They're- the odds of hitting one is unusual,
yes.
which makes it much more special when you do. So you cherish those moments even more because you know they're not going to come around a lot.
Yes. Yes. So we had an encounter last night that I know you will so appreciate, but I stepped outside last night in the dark for just a couple of minutes, and all of a sudden, a great horned owl hooted. And he was close. I mean, he was like in a tree right there. My eyes couldn't adjust to the lighting. He hooted twice and then must have flew off because that was it. I just stood there looking,
Yeah.
looking, but my eyes were still so, unadjusted to the light. I love it. Oh my gosh.
My great horned owl story, and you can read, it was very brief. It's part of one of my stories. I taught teachers at ComSet a couple times from Queens College. They were in the teaching program there. So we did a night hike, and part of it was a sharing circle after the night hike. In a circle, sharing quietly. Everyone was talking like this, almost in whispers that you're disturbing whatever is going on. Because we had just finished a night hike, including a solo walk, and so everything had gotten down to a quiet time. And we're sharing, and then suddenly we hear this. I'm not going to do the sound because I might scare your listeners, but we hear this scream, and it's almost like a crying baby scream. And if you're familiar with nature, that I knew what it was. No one else in the circle knew what it was, and they were pretty. If I was in their shoes, I'd have been scared, but I knew what it was, so it didn't scare me quite as much. It was a dying rabbit scream.
Oh.
I know you immediately feel for the rabbit, but the magic didn't happen yet. Some predator had just grabbed, or maybe it got away. We don't know. But it had to be no more than a minute later, a great horned owl flew over our circle. I couldn't tell whether it had the rabbit, but it flew over our circle, and it landed in a tree with the moonlight behind it. Only for a few seconds, and it was gone. Same thing, gone. But without even seeing it, the whole predator-prey thing that just happened was it was bone-chilling that you just were a part of probably a killing, if not a killing, a close to a killing.
Yeah,
No.
and, I mean, my reaction, "Oh, the poor bunny," but then I have to remember that, "Oh, but wonderful for the owl."
Yeah.
Th we often don't think about the predator needs to survive too, and without that, it will die, so, yeah.
My sister says sometimes, "Why is the natural world so cruel? Why do they make it so things have to get killed like that?" And I'm thinking to myself, well, that's a very human way to look at it. That's a very human-centered way to look at it.
Yes, yes.
But it is pretty when you think about something, you have to tear something apart and eat it. It's pretty not something you necessarily want to watch. It's
Yeah, pretty gruesome.
you know,
Yeah.
but it's also pretty spectacular. Its own
Yeah.
that everything has the tools it needs to
The
survive.
unique tools
Right.
it needs to survive, yeah. Just something that you just said before about taking hikes through nature and not often encountering wildlife, it reminds me of the Four Shields, I believe, teaching that talks about, like, how you walk, how you appear in nature, um, will have an impact on the wildlife around you. So, as unconscious beings as most of us are, we take a walk, maybe we're talking with a friend and we're talking like this and we're walking briskly through the woods and everything just scatters. It's pretty interesting to realize how our lack of consciousness of how we approach nature is is one of the main reasons probably why we don't have these encounters. Like you said, we're just kind of approaching it, not that you are in your hikes, but I'm just saying some people, or sometimes when we go out into nature, we're just loud.
Yep. I tend to be a lot more talkative when I'm with someone else. When I'm by
Oh, you're
myself,
not talking.
well, I could talk out loud to myself, but you know what I mean? I'm more conscious about being quiet when I'm by myself.
True. Yeah.
And I could still be loud in the way I walk and all those, but I'm much more conscious because when I'm by myself, I want to see things. I mean, when you're with a friend, it's almost a social situation, not just a nature situation, unless they have the same goal as you do.
Right.
um, but I can tell you a quick thing about role modeling. And I never looked at myself as an inculcator or someone who's preaching about nature. I looked at myself as a role model and a facilitator. You're not going to change anyone's habits by telling them they're doing the wrong thing. You're going to change people's behavior by doing the right thing. So the quick story is that I led night hikes with my explorers all the time. And I would never even have come up with this story if you hadn't just mentioned what you mentioned about your behavior in nature. Well, one of my campers ended up being one of my assistants later on, and she knew that I had to go to Colorado. My father had passed, and I had to leave the explorers to go out for the funeral. And so she said, "I'll do the night hike." And she comes back and she's so excited when I got back to tell me that she did what I did and got the kids to be completely quiet on the night hike. And just, it was just anytime my assistants turn and do something that I did and are able to pull it off too, on top of that, is, that's where that role model part comes in. I mean, I see so many people just tell the kids when they're leading hikes, "Oh, you have to be." They don't have to be quiet. It's- Who's you're telling me it's any behavior. You have to do that. No, you don't. You don't have to do anything. So a lot of times, this is tying back to what I told you about the owl. I use that story and others from night hikes to get people to be quiet. You got a chance to see the same thing as I get a chance to if you can stay quiet.
Yeah.
Big difference.
Yeah.
Does it always work? No, but it works a lot of the time.
Yeah, it reminds me, a couple of weeks ago, I interviewed a gentleman named George Buman, who just wrote a book, um, Eavesdropping on Animals. And it's about his experience living in Yellowstone National Park. And one of the suggestions, like I said kind of before about the whole scatter thing, he said, you walk out your front door to go to the store and you burst out of the door and you walk over to your car and you slam the door. And he goes, yeah, and everything scatters. He says, try this. Open the door very slowly. Step out. Walk slowly, and you might encounter something. And you know what? I haven't been able to do it once yet.
Well, your mind focuses on what the task at hand is all the time. I do it all the time, and I chalk a lot up to my suburban
Oh,
upbringing.
yeah.
If I was born in a rural area or a area that in the like is I remember reading a lot of the people in your book, kinda a handful of them had no running water and electricity when they were in some parts of their lives. Totally different setup. Suburbia is all noise and congestion and a mindset too
Yeah.
that's separate from nature.
Yeah, I mean, what's fascinating is it's not an urban environment. Yes, but it's pretty darn urban, and in fact, most of the people living in suburbia are from urban environments, so that mentality is just kind of brought out. I mean, on Long Island, we're the first suburban community, right? Levittown, built right after World War II. And, so all these people that moved, they moved out of the city onto Long Island. So I would imagine in all metropolitan areas, pretty much the same migration happened.
Have you read a little bit of the history of Long Island? Well, one of the things that's mentioned is that the city people would describe Long Island as a nature's paradise.
Oh,
And that was before the '50s, obviously, before Levittown was built, before World War II, or during and before World War II. People would escape to Long Island to
really?
get away from the city. And there were marshes and forests.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Deer Park. There was not one deer that I ever encountered in Deer Park.
Yeah, you just look at the names of the roads and towns. I grew up in Locust Valley. Now there were still some locust trees, but not a lot. And there was a lane called Skunks Misery. There's no skunks. Same thing. I love that name, by the way, Skunks Misery Lane. I think it's one of the all-time great names for a road.
It's because they were being made miserable by the cars?
I imagine when they named that road, there were no there were no cars.
Yeah.
Very interesting to most people don't know the histories of the places they live in, and I only know it because I don't even remember. I had to do research for something. It's the only reason I know some of the history of Long Island. So,
Yeah. I know sometimes, I do earth energy healing for people all over the world. So remotely, I work with maps and I do dowsing and I kind of tune into the energy of the land. And I often ask my clients to do a little research about what happened on this land before there were homes. What is the history of this land? And most people don't have much understanding of what transpired there before, and it's always kind of a little bit of a revelation to them when they do a little research. I think it is important. It is important for us to know about the land that we're living on and the beings in our backyard.
God, I live in a forest that was most of the Blue Ridge Mountains that was cut down and forested, and it's all second growth here.
Wow.
You didn't know that, that people thought it was more important to cut down all the trees than to save the natural world, but this was the 1800s and before that even. So, a different mindset again of what the land was for.
Yeah. So, Eric, do you have any last story you'd like to share or some last words or thoughts for us?
Yeah, but you had, some Costa Rica was mentioned a couple times, so I'll give you a quick Costa Rica story. Um, I love to travel, and it's one of the reasons I retired, that and the fact that living on Long Island becomes almost financially impossible. So, um, yeah, as you know, two of our educators started leading trips to Costa Rica, and I was lucky enough to go. I think it was 2005 or 6, I went down to Costa Rica with a group of our friends and their friends. There was about 12, 14 people went. Um, and we happened to be going to visit, not planned by any of us, I don't think. I think the guy decided we should go to a 900-year-old almond tree. So guy took us on a hike to a 900-year-old almond tree.
Wow.
It was slogging and going uphill. There was mud. I was helping people in the days that I could help people uphill. Um, and we made it to this tree. It's almost indescribable. And I've seen redwood trees, so which are pretty indescribable in their own right because they're so humbling. It's unless you're there, it's hard to imagine that feeling. That's a totally different story, but I did lie on top of a redwood tree that was on the ground. And what a feeling. It becomes a nurse log and everything is growing off of it now. And I thought it was a boulder when I saw it on the ground. As I got closer, it just opened up this huge redwood, coastal redwood that was lying on the ground.
Wow.
So I've seen large trees before, but almond trees are just rainforest trees in general are amazing because of the number of things that grow on them. It's just vines and all kinds of plants, air plants, epiphytes. Everything's growing on these trees.
Wow.
And we come upon this tree that is just the girth is just amazing. We try to get around it, some of us, to see if we can make
Wow.
no. It probably would have taken 12 of us to get around this thing, 10, 12 of
Wow.
us to get around this tree. You can't see the top of it because you're in the rainforest,
Yeah.
but you know it's going up pretty high. So it's, again, that complete humbling feeling. And I even thought that I could hear clicking inside the tree because there's like between those roots, those buttress roots that stick out
Yeah.
to support the tree. There's like, gonna call them caves, little openings in the tree that I could have sworn I heard clicking of bats in there, but that could have just been my mind hoping that was. But so the reason that in some ways it's just more amazing, not as amazing, not more amazing as the redwood, is that the amount of life that's living in one tree, and they're all connected in some way. Um, and as you know, also we do lots of rainforest programs, and going to the rainforest, of course, makes everything come alive. Just like going to our forest makes it easier to teach forest ecology here in our country. Teaching the rainforest program before was a lot different than teaching it after experiencing that and all the other things that happened on the trip. But that one thing made me write the rainbow almond tree. That one, I went back and wrote it in half an hour because of that experience.
I did not. Wow. I did not know that. Wow.
Of course, I tweaked it later, but
Yeah.
the initial story only took half an hour to write because of the inspiration. I can't write unless I found that, and maybe that's a writing shortcoming. I can't write unless something inspires me. I don't know how writers do it. I don't
Well,
even
I think that that's true for any creative activity. You have to be inspired. And um, Liz Gilbert, who wrote Eat, Pray, Love, uh, she wrote a book called Big Magic. And she talks about how creativity is kind of a divine packet or something like that. And it's looking for a host that will bring it to life. And that when you get inspired, it's that information coming down, but are you going to follow through and create whatever that inspiration is, manifested on this planet? So
am
that
I thought
tree put that seed within you to create your book.
just like the story with the leaf, it takes something, and the deer, it takes something to inspire creativity like that. It's but I'm gonna go back just a little bit since you wanted to wrap it up. I always hear and I know how important global warming is to everything, and that it's the number one issue because it is, as you can see all around us, it's affecting everything that's going on now with climate and the connections of nature. But I always harken back to diversity, what started me off on all this. And I always think it's just as important an issue that just doesn't get the same kind of publicity as global warming, that our diversity is shrinking at an unbelievable rate. And it's you mentioned Edwin O. Wilson in your book too. Well, he's the one that wrote Diversity Leads to Stability. So if that diversity reduces, we are actually reducing our own ability to survive on this planet. And if I had to make people aware of anything, that's what I would that's what make people aware of what we're doing to the diversity of life on this planet. And of course, global warming is intricately connected to that too. But it's an issue that isn't getting in the in the media. And it's so we have so much beauty and diversity in this world to be letting that happen. And it goes back to that tug of the single nature thing in nature. You start tearing apart those strands of the web of life, and the whole thing will collapse eventually.
Oh, yes. So true. So true. And we have to also recall that everything that we're seeing outside of us is actually occurring inside of us. So so the kind of destruction that we're doing to the planet is really a destruction of our inner world. And it all starts here. It all starts here. Having that love for this beautiful planet, it all starts here.
And the love of yourself and others. If you're not happy and you're angry like so many people are.
Yeah, nothing is sacred then. Nothing is sacred. Wow. Well, I knew this was going to be a beautiful interview. Thank you so much for coming on with me, Eric.
Oh, it was a pleasure. Talking to somebody brings out more than you ever imagined.
Oh, yeah. I think that is one of the reasons for my book is sharing our stories is so important. And I so appreciate your willingness to share, not just on this podcast, but with all of your storytelling that you do in your programs that you're still running as a volunteer. And I thank you so much for showing up today, and Smitty too.
I guess he wants to say goodbye. My other cat probably is off somewhere else, but look. Yeah.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you for being a part of the Enchanted Earth podcast. Comment below, share, and most of all, please hit the subscribe button so that you'll hear when we publish another inspiring episode. You can visit us at luminous-spaces.com for more information on our online courses, retreats, and offerings. Thank you and have a magical day.